Well, hello, and welcome back to our current president, Joe Biden. Now, he is going to be our final president until our new president has been elected. Joe Biden is a man who spent nearly half a century in public service as a senator and vice president, and who will endure profound family loss, became the 46th President of the United States on January 20th, 2021. Biden's presidency followed a highly continuous election carried out during a pandemic, a national reckoning over radical injustice, and depending on of political divisiveness in the country. Even in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, Joe Biden won over 81 million popular votes, the most in U.S. presidential electoral history, while his opponent, President Donald Trump, won more than 74 million. Just over a week before Biden's inauguration, a mob of extremists stormed the U.S. Capitol in the name of Trump, who had made baseless claims that he had won the 2020 election. The House of Representatives voted to impeach Trump for a second time. Biden took office alongside Kamala Harris, who became the first woman and woman of color to serve as U.S. Vice President. At the age of 80, Biden is the oldest U.S. president in history. Prior to his running for the nation's highest office, Biden served 36 years as a U.S. Senator from Delaware and went on to serve as Vice President of the United States with President Barack Obama. As a two-term vice president, Biden focused largely on economic and foreign policy issues. In an April 2019 video statement announcing his bid for the presidency, Biden characterized the 2020 U.S. election as a battle for the soul of this nation. In a video released 4 years later announcing his plan to run for a second term, he said the same thing about the 2024 race. Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. was born on November 20th, 1942, in the blue-collar city of Scranton, Pennsylvania. At the age of 10, he moved with his family to the Wilmington, Delaware area, where his father found work as a car salesman. The first of 4 siblings, Biden attended a series of Catholic schools, including the elite preparatory high school, Archmore Academy. Though he excelled at sports, Biden received mediocre grades and struggled with a stutter. In 1965, he graduated from the University of Delaware with a double major in history and political science, and 3 years later he earned a law degree from Syracuse University. Meanwhile, in 1966, Biden married Nelia Hunter, with whom he would have 3 children. Upon finishing law school, Biden returned to the Wilmington area and worked as an attorney for the next 4 years. In the 1970s, he won his first election to the Newcastle County Council. Then 2 years later, at the age of 29, he pulled off a surprisingly upset of the Republican incumbent J. Caleb Boggs in a race for the U.S. Senate. Tragedy struck, however, before he was sworn in as the 5th youngest senator in U.S. history. That December, his wife and 13-month-old daughter were killed, and his 2 sons were hospitalized when a tractor-trailer plowed into their station wagon. Rather than move to Washington, D.C., a devoted Biden decided to commute by train every day so that he could spend more time with his sons. Biden remarried in 1977 to school teacher Jill Jacobs, with whom he would have 1 more daughter. Biden won re-election in 1978 and 5 times after that. Overall, he spent 36 years in the U.S. Senate, including 8 years as chair of the Judiciary Committee and 4 years as chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. Despite general supporting civil rights, Biden opposed the forced busing of students to end de facto segregation. Later on, he presided over the continuous configuration hearing of U.S. Supreme Court nominee Robert Bork and Clarence Thomas. Bork was ultimately rejected by the Senate, while Thomas was narrowly approved. Biden also worked to preserve Delaware's favorable corporate climate, legislated against domestic violence, and crafted an anti-crime bill that proved for 100,000 more cops on the nation's street, banned assault weapons, and managed tougher penalties for drug dealers. Known for his foreign policy work, as well as traveled senator purportedly called Serbian leader Slobodan Milosevic the war criminal to his face during a 1993 visit to Belgrade. Nearly a decade later, Biden voted to authorize the use of force in Iraq. Nonetheless, he eventually became a critic of the way George W. Bush's administration handled the conflict. Having raised a solid amount of campaign cash, Biden launched his first presidential bid in June of 1987. On the campaign trail, he took the paraphrasing British Labour politician Neil Knockaman. Although he had apparently credited Knock in prior speeches, he failed to do so during an appearance in Iowa State Fair, and even borrowed facts from Knock's life, stating inaccurately, for example, that he was the first in his family to go to college, and that his ancestors were coal miners. Soon after, reports surfaced that Biden had likewise lifted passages from Robert F. Kennedy and Herbert Humphrey, and he was caught on camera exaggerating his academic credentials. With his candidacy on the defensive, Biden withdrew that September to concentrate on the Bork hearings. He then collapsed the following February from a life-threatening brain aneurysm, underwent 2 surgeries, and took a 7-month leave from the Senate. Biden kicked off his second attempt at the White House 20 years later during the 2008 primary. He dropped out after securing only 1% of the delegates in the Iowa Democratic caucuses. Barack Obama tapped him to be his running mate after winning the Democratic nomination. In the November 2008 presidential elections, Obama and Biden bested their Republican opponents, John McCain and Sarah Palin, with 52.9% of the popular vote. In 2012, they defeated Republican challenger Mitt Romney and his running mate Paul Ryan. After taking office in 2009 as the 47th Vice President of the United States, Biden was charged with overseeing a $787 billion economic stimulus package, running a middle-class task force, and reviving an arms reduction treaty with Russia. He also played a strong advisory role with respect to conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. In 2015, Biden's eldest son, Beau, died of brain cancer, dealing a heavy blow for a man who had already endured such loss. Biden considered a presidential run in 2016, but ultimately decided against it. On April 25th, 2019, Biden announced his candidacy in the 2020 Democratic presidential primaries. As a popular former vice president, he immediately entered the race with high name recognition. Biden ran alongside 28 other Democratic candidates in a crowded primary that pitted Biden's more moderate policies against those of progressive candidates such as Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Throughout his campaign, Biden emphasized his working class background, drawing a contrast with the wealthy upbringing of his opponent, President Trump. Biden often quoted his father as telling him, "The measure of a man is not how often he is knocked down, but how quickly he gets up." Initially behind the race for Democratic nomination, Biden bounced back with a big win in South Carolina primary at the end of February. A key part of Biden's win in South Carolina was a strong showing of support from African American voters in the state. He then clinched the majority of delegates in Super Tuesday voting in early March. In May of 2020, when the police killing of George Floyd spurred nationwide protest, Biden traveled to Houston to meet with Floyd's family. It was his first major trip outside his home in Delaware since he had shifted his campaign away from public events amid the threat of COVID-19. As some protests and the police response to the protests escalate to violence, Biden called for racial justice, but also appealed to the country to heal, saying, "We are a nation enraged, but we can't let our rage consume us. We're a nation exhausted, but we can't let our exhaustion defeat us." On August 11th, 2020, Biden announced Kamala Harris as his vice presidential running mate, writing a note to campaign supporters, "I need someone working alongside me who is smart, tough, and ready to lead. Kamala is that person." Harris, a senator from California, had initially campaigned on her own ticket for a presidency and had challenged Biden on issues of race during debates for Democratic nomination. With her selection, Harris became the first Black Asian American woman to be named a major party's ticket. In the run-up to the elections, Biden and Trump took part in two presidential debates. The first, held on September 29th, was a chaotic event overwhelmed with interruptions, crosstalk, and name-calling. A second debate, held on October 22nd, was calmer exchange, as the mediator controlled a mute button to silence either of the candidates should they continue to speak beyond their time or interrupt each other. A looming issue throughout the election was the coronavirus pandemic, which had climbed to more than 230,000 claimed 230,000 American lives and affected more than 9 million in the country. President Trump himself became infected with COVID-19 in October and was hospitalized at Walter Reed Medical Center, where he received several treatments, including an experimental antibody treatment. A central agreement in Biden's campaign was that Trump had failed to effectively lead in the fight against the virus. The pandemic was not only a prominent campaign issue, it also transformed the way Americans voted in the presidential election. States saw a record number of people taking part in early voting, as well as using mail-in ballots. The high number of early and mail-in ballots was partially why Americans waited 4 days to learn which candidate they had elected as president. Electoral college voting outcomes that initially looked positive for President Trump shifted in Biden's favor as more votes were counted. By November 7th, Biden was declared the winner of the 2020 presidential election by the Associated Press and major media outlets. Despite the outcome, President Trump continued to challenge the election by pressuring election officials to find more votes and by filing more than 50 lawsuits in state and federal court claims there was massive fraud. None of the counts ruled there was evidence of any significant voter fraud. Despite the count finding, Trump and others persisted claims that election was fraudulent, fueled by the January 6, 2021 storming of the U.S. Capitol by extremists. At his inauguration, Biden addressed the country's challenges and diversions, saying, "Few people in our nation's history have been more challenged or found a time more challenging or difficult than the time we are in now. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul, and secure the future of America requires so much more than words and requires the most exclusive of all things in the democracy: unity." And with that, I will see you all in the next one.